Fresh air.
Welcome to a very special edition of Fresh Ears, the one where we welcome Fresh Air Media to the Fresh Air family. Fresh Air production itself is over 20 years old, but Fresh Air Media is just a few days old. Here to tell us more about Fresh Air Media and its purpose in life is Director of Marketing, and very conveniently for this conversation, Growth, Richard Blake. Welcome, Rich.
Hello, Michaela. Hello.
This is
Lovely.
Interesting, the two of us sat down making a podcast.
I know, it's very weird. We're normally in a meeting room with a kind of, with a presentation or with other people. So, yeah, this is very, very weird, but very good fun.
I'll do my best to make you comfortable.
Thank you very much. I'd appreciate that.
Fresh Air Media is your baby. First of all, for everybody listening, can you tell me the difference at a really headline level between what Fresh Air Production does and what Fresh Air Media will offer?
Okay, so I will try and be as clear as possible. So Fresh Air are the expert end-to-end podcast partner for brands, whereas Fresh Air Production builds your brand's own audio. So we'll build you, as a brand, your own show. Fresh Air Media builds your brand through audio.
So they're both two separate parts of the overarching Fresh Air brand.
Absolutely. Completely. And so Fresh Air Media is sort of two parts. A will promote the show that we make for our clients, and we've been doing that really successfully for the last 3 years.
How many top 10 launches have you had recently, Rich?
I would say 5 or 6. I think it's 6 now in the last 6 months. So yeah, we are. We know all those sort of tips and tricks to kind of get you up the top of your charts and and drive success for your listeners and for your brand.
Okay, so that's part one. What's the other part?
And part two is about building brands that might not already have their own shows. So with a real sort of mission to build creative, bespoke, independent podcast and audio campaigns for agencies and brands, big or small.
So essentially, part one is, okay, we've made your show, now we need to talk about it so that people know to listen. And part two is you might not have your own show yet. You might just be kind of putting your foot into the podcast door, through the podcast door. But we can still help you through the medium of audio to make your brand or business shout louder.
Yeah, not just shout louder, but just drive the goals that you have as a brand. Audio is perfect for lots and lots of different things, whether it be awareness, consideration, or action. My role is to kind of help brands through that journey, because often they will never have used audio before.
But fundamentally, they don't have to have their own existing podcast series in order to come to Fresh Air Media and say, help me meet my brand's objectives through the medium of audio. No,
not at all. I mean, we are very creative. We have created some amazing audio campaigns in our time, and we've got some fantastic examples of work that we've done creatively as well as from a media point of view. So, yes.
We're really solutions driven at Fresh Air. One of the things that we say to our clients is that we never want to make a vanity project. We want to be able to deliver on objectives. So what are the problems that we're solving for our clients? I'm told that you have not just one problem, Rich, but 3. Is that true?
Yes,
What's
absolutely.
What's the first?
The first is about robots. Basically, I got into marketing because I really like people. I liked the idea of having a target audience. I like the proposition. I like being really persuasive with a creative that you did. And that was wonderful. There was a real sense of craft to marketing. And my feeling at the moment is craft is being lost. That focused sort of brand conversation that you could have with your audience is getting lost. It's now just a doom scroll. A hope that we can disrupt someone else's feed to pay attention for a second. And that scroll never ends.
I get stuck in the doom scroll, I have to admit.
We all get stuck, and that's absolutely fine. But I would challenge you to think about whether you remember the last 5 videos that you looked at and as part of your doom scroll.
That's a really good challenge.
The robots will always find something else for you to watch, because it really knows what you like. For my feed, it's all about cricket, and it's all about 1980s British comedy, for instance.
I've got quite a lot of false eyelashes in mine lately, actually.
But I couldn't tell you anything more than that. And I think so for me, the focus is on that volume, and it's this kind of fruit machine of content that is basically constantly delivering content that it thinks you like. And so from a kind of an advertising point of view, it's all about volume over quality, and it's all automation. So it's just focusing on feeding that beast of the scroll. It feels like a fruit machine of sort of trading and yields. It's sort of, in the end, it feels like crop rotation to me, rather than on people persuading people, or even businesses talking to customers. So for me, it's about how you bring back the people, how do you bring back the personality, how do you get that sense of a conversation, and through that conversation, you get that real sense of brand love, because people in the end are, complicated, weird people sometimes, and actually they really respond to a brand having a conversation with them and persuading them, rather than just constantly serving them something that they think they might like.
So problem one, the robots are taking over, and it's about actually not just serving them up volumes of content. It's about creating something that talks to them as an individual in a place or about a subject that genuinely interests them. What about problem two? So
problem two, I call it's just a number. Now, so about 10 years ago, so I'm a marketing director by trade, and I've worked at marketing for now sort of 20 years. And about 10 years ago, I sat in a room and discovered that basically 30% of my well cared for media budget wasn't actually spent on buying media spaces. It was spent on middlemen, on people, and a load of acronyms. So SSPs, DSPs, tech stacks, all the kind of jargon that came with advertising. And basically that jargon equaled they were taking a chunk of my budget to spend on themselves. There was some value around that, because whatever I paid, however I did it, however my campaign was executed, and importantly, wherever my ad was placed, the promise was the same. It's basically a magic number that showed my CFO and my CMO and my boss what that spend could deliver, and it would deliver the number that was promised. So as long as they took their cut, it was all about that number. But the problem about that, and the ability to measure almost everything in marketing now, is you get that result quickly, and it's naturally short term. So in the end, you're just chasing a number. And what it's doing is damaging long-term brand building. It's damaging the kind of the confidence of marketers, because brands aren't numbers. They're sort of their perceptions, their perspectives, their opinions, all tied up in a logo. So for me, it's all about how do you build a brand for the long term.
That's actually going back to what you said at the start about, no, it's not about just shouting loudest. It's not just about numbers. It's about creating relationships, and based on what the objectives are for your brand in the first place.
Absolutely. It's all about that sense of consideration and recommend. It's the hardest bit of marketing, but it's also the most rewarding.
Okay. 2 down, 1 to go. Richard Blake's problem number 3.
So problem number 3, and it's sort of what I was just starting to talk about, which is something that in marketing you talk about a lot, which is called the messy middle. And basically in marketing, you've got 2 things. You have that upper funnel, fluffy, expensive brand TV campaign, which is quite sexy. It's quite well invested in, but it is very unmeasurable. Or you have the lower funnel sales activation stuff, which is sort of like your Google ads, your social, all that kind of stuff. So you don't have the understanding of what that messy middle is in between. So it's very easy to get 1 million video views on TikTok. Most marketers now will be able to press a button and get 1 million video views pretty quickly. But it's really hard to get 1 million customers.
In terms of then converting that, seeing that ad being served to you, to then going and doing something as a
Absolutely,
result.
yeah. So as marketing professionals, our value is turning that reach into our ROI. And I think most marketers get the most excitement and most value out of their role when they're focusing on that messy middle, on consideration and recommendation. And that's where, for me, the real magic happens with marketing.
Okay, thank you. You might think that I know all this, but I'm a creative person, and it's really helpful to kind of go through it and break it all down. Those are your 3 problems. So can podcasting fix all that?
Podcasting is really special. It's about being chosen. It can go half a way to solving a lot of the problems that we currently have in marketing. I'm not going to say that you're going to stop investing in TV or stop investing in search, but what I can say is it will be a brilliant bridge between the two, and it will help
across the messy middle.
Yes, absolutely,
okay.
A bridge across the messy middle, which will really help most marketers kind of bridging that gap. So I think the first thing to say is, go back to a little bit about what you're getting when you buy an ad. And I used to have this a lot when I was in marketing. It was all about kind of disruption. So like, hey, we're going to be really disruptive. We're going to be really impactful. And what you're actually doing is disrupting somebody's day or distracting them from something else that they wanted to do.
I remember a lot of the conversations of, hey, what's the cut through? What's going to make people stop and pay attention?
Absolutely. And podcasts are different. So first of all, podcasts command the highest level of attention. So
are we going to have a stat?
We are going to have a stat.
Excellent.
Yeah, the highest. It's one of my favourite stats. Obviously, I do a lot of stats, and this is one of my favourites. 69% versus 35% TV. This is from a Guardian Tapestry study a couple of years ago, and they looked at.
That's quite significant.
It's significant, but it does really, really make sense as well, because you think about it, people are spending a lot of time with a podcast, and they're also spending a lot of time thinking, they're choosing to spend time with their podcast, and they're spending it on headphones as well. So it's really great chosen time. Another stat that I absolutely love is something that Spotify came out with just after the pandemic, which was all about how in this world of visuals, there was just too much visual noise around. And audio was that brilliant way of escaping. And you see it on tubes and you see it on trains all over the country. People are in their headphones and their attention is in their ears, not in their eyes.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I suppose the other thing with the TV stat that you said is that it's down to the fact that often when you're watching TV, you're doing something else at the same time. So you're not actually giving it your full attention in the first place, unlike when you're listening and you're in that moment, as you said, that person on the tube.
Absolutely. And in the moment is a really key thing. I find myself watching TV now and I put my phone on the side of the sofa, and before I know it, as soon as there's even something slightly boring on TV, I'll pick up my phone and I'll scroll through, and it's a constant fight of attention between the two screens. Yeah. Podcasts aren't like that. Podcast is chosen special time that all your attention is in your ears. It's rather wonderful.
One of the things that Neil, our founder, says often is that you don't ever listen to a podcast by accident, and going to your point about it being chosen. And talking of escaping and that headphone moment, I totally use headphones to shut out the world. And I think sometimes as a way of making myself focus on the audio rather than doing the whole second screen thing, I'll put my headphones off and then I'll lose myself in that podcast or some music. And it totally makes that experience so much more intimate. So how many more people are like me? How many people listen on headphones?
Well, 90%.
I knew you'd have a stat ready there.
I'm so glad you asked me that question. So 90% of people listen on headphones for more than 30 minutes at a time. I'll repeat that. So 90% of people listen on headphones for more than 30 minutes at a time.
You can say it 3 times if you like.
And it's a really hard to reach audience as well. So podcasts naturally focus on that 18 to 44 audience. It's more ABC One. It's more likely to be a business decision maker. So, and I keep talking about attention. Attention is the word I love. Attention is also weirdly becoming kind of a metric that a lot of media planners and marketers use because they recognise this is a thing. But I think you'll never get this. Most of attention is measured by eye tracking. Obviously, you cannot track how what direction your ears are pointing. But this is really unrivaled attention. It's real attention. We've got neuroscience studies that show that because you take away the visuals, you're able to take in more detail and nuance. You're able to engage for longer, and you sort of co-create with the host and guests you're listening to because you're putting yourself in their place. You're putting yourself around the table with them. You're imagining what they look like. You're imagining what they're doing. So you may not get 1 million listeners for a podcast, but the quality of the listen you'll get is much, much better, and therefore the results are better too.
We talk sometimes, don't we, about how when you read a book and then you see the film of the book and it never quite measures up to what you've imagined. It's that whole kind of theatre of the mind that audio does. It picks on your individual references and paints your own personal pictures, which I think is really special. Okay, so we can't be fair unless we look at comparing audio and podcast listening to at least some other channels. And I know you have some more data for me, which I like this one very much. So TikTok, one of the fastest growing channels. How does podcast listening and TikTok compare?
TikTok is a phenomenon, it's amazing. It's a brilliant way of driving reach. It's a brilliant way of driving video views for your brand. So what we did for one of our clients recently is they launched a TikTok channel at the same time as launching a new podcast with us. And we got a great comparison with some brand tracking they did. So you saw the difference. So it's something called an NPS score.
Can you tell me, you've had to tell me this before, but I have forgotten. What does NPS stand for?
NPS stands for Net Promoter Score. Essentially, you ask people how many people would you recommend this brand,
right?
And you kind of take the people who positively recommend that brand versus the people who wouldn't recommend that brand. So basically, if you get a positive NPS score, then you are a recommended brand,
okay,
essentially. And it's really, really hard to do well. I think we worked at the BBC, and the BBC is one of the only brands in the UK that has a positive NPS score. We got some fantastic NPS scores for this TikTok and new podcast channel. So we got a 57% plus positive NPS score versus 35% positive for the TikTok channel. So you got that real difference. It was for a 25 to 44 audience. And it was obvious when you came to it as well. It was all about the engagement. That long form engagement really, really delivered for them. Because you're closest to the people, you're closest to the host, you're round the table with them, and they're telling a story. Storytelling is such a pure method when you talk about podcasting, and it can be really, really persuasive.
I think that's the other thing we say, isn't it, that every single brand has a story to tell, whether it's directly about the brand or whether it's kind of segued sideways from the brand and the brand is bringing it to you. But yeah, storytelling is massively important. So let's go back to where we started. We talked firstly about the difference between Fresh Air Production and Fresh Air Media. The Fresh Air Production arm is about building your own series. Why would a brand do that rather than the kind of easy fix potentially of just renting space in someone else's content with ads?
I think at the end is you have to have the confidence to build for the long term, and that is really what a marketer is for. As a marketer, you want to build for the long term. You're building a business, you're building a brand. It's not just about, as I said earlier, it's not about just a short-term chase for a number. So you really, but it's also a really brave thing to do as a marketer as well. You really stand out because you're thinking for the long term. You're not just thinking for the short term. So for me, building your own show means that you're building space for the long term. You're not short-term squatting in someone else's show or your social feed. So you're not asking a kind of a piece of talent or an influencer to kind of segue uncomfortably into a brand that you don't feel like they're right.
You can often hear that you get to those ads and you're like, they're either just reading a script or you think, do you really mean that?
Absolutely. One of the reasons we talk about why you should be building your own show is that it's not an expensive TV show, a branded magazine, but a regular, always-on, flexible audio channel. It's not expensive. It doesn't have some of the faff and the people that involve in terms of a big video shoot. It's a really easy, agile medium.
We haven't just made assumptions, have we? We've actually conducted some of our own research into this field. What's our research told us?
I mean, the first thing to say about our research is we really wanted to understand the audience ourselves. There is a huge amount of amazing podcast research out there, which I make it my job to read every slide for you, so you don't have to. But I wanted to do our own research because we really wanted to understand whether a lot of the assumptions we were making were absolutely right.
Yeah.
And a lot of the podcast research we were seeing were from advertising platforms particularly, so we're very much focused on...
You might have a vested interest.
Yes, a vested interest. And I think the key bit for me, and it was sort of depressing, but it was also absolutely reflected what we thought already, was that we asked what were your top five podcasts and which podcast and format completely dominated. It was the rest is stable. So rest is politics, rest is football, rest is history. Pretty much everybody we asked had that as part of their suite of podcasts they were listening to. Normally, most people have 4 or 5 regular podcasts that will be part of their
kind of listening portfolio.
Their listening portfolio, absolutely. And rest is will always be, will pretty much always be part of it. So, and what we find really is that podcasting exists as like those 5 or 6 top shows will be absolutely stuffed with advertising. Which means that they're sort of too stuffed and don't necessarily reward the passionate communities that made them a success in the first place. Whereas what we think is that there's obviously scope to be able to deliver scale very quickly with those big podcasts, but there is a layer below that as well, with really passionate communities and podcasts that have a slightly smaller audience but a much more dedicated quality audience that really can deliver really great brand value.
So you're kind of basically talking about the big players have the most advertising stuff within them, but there's an underrated layer of podcasts with passionate audiences that actually could work harder for you.
Absolutely. And so that's really what we're after. We want to make sure that we're bespoke. Basically, this isn't going to be a cookie cutter approach. It's about making sure that we deliver the best value for our clients by making sure that the podcast host and the podcast format fits with their brand's objectives in a much clearer way. It's not just about a reach, an impression. It's about making sure that we are delivering the best value for you.
Now, I already know the answer to this question, obviously, but we also asked them what the top 5 things were that people hate about podcasts. ...
Yes, it's ads or adverts. Other people said adverts, but it was ads. So, which I think is really that kind of kickback on all that lovely attention that I've been talking about. I think it's partly a cultural thing. I mean, the BBC has a licence fee and delivers podcasts in the UK completely free of ads. But I also think it's a part of a new medium as well. I remember when I'm old enough to remember when Facebook didn't take advertising and they started taking advertising, and people hated the ads there as well. And now that's all you get on Facebook. So it's partly just the way that we have to get used to a new medium. But that said, for us, that means that we can be better. We should be better as an industry to deliver advertising in a way that really plays up to the strength of podcasting.
That's twofold, I guess. One is about choosing which podcasts to put your ads in, depending on your target audience, but also being really sensitive to and able to craft a creative that doesn't feel like you've just kind of slapped something in with no love.
Absolutely. I think a lot of it is about craft. And at Fresh Air, we have this amazing audio creatives who can make things sound fantastic and really transport you to another place. I also think it's about just remembering it's about quality time spent. I often see impressions being bandied around in media plans for podcasts. An impression is for a display ad. It's basically a view of a little picture in a box on a web page, or you might not even actually get that little picture viewed on your screen. It might be below the fold.
Whereas, that would still count as an impression.
Absolutely. Whereas in a podcast, an impression is a listen that could be 30 seconds, could be 60 seconds, could be 2 minutes, 4 minutes. For me, it's about quality time spent. It's about a listen. It's about spending time with somebody, and that's the only way that you can be much more persuasive and deliver that kind of messy middle problem that I talked about earlier on. If you're spending quality time with somebody, then you're able to persuade them much more, and you're able to tell a story in a much nicer way.
Okay, kind of pretty much my final question, and it's indicative of the fact that we always ask ourselves the hardest questions because we need to be able to give the answers to the questions that people will ask. We've just spent 10-15 minutes talking about why people should build their own shows and not just advertise in somebody else's content. This episode of Fresh Ears is all about the birth of Fresh Air Media, whose objective, to a degree, is about putting ads in other people's shows. So why is that still the right thing to do, and what makes Fresh Air Media do that differently, better?
I mean, first of all, there are always going to be big hit shows that you want to be part of. You are able to connect to audiences much quicker by delivering ads in the bigger shows or delivering partnerships with the bigger shows. And I think partnerships is a really important phrase here. By a partner, I mean somebody who can actually deliver the same audience value as a piece of content that is not ad funded. It really needs to feel like the brand is seamlessly part of the story that podcast is telling, and not just a little 30-second distraction and then getting on to the main conversation. So for us, Fresh Air Media is all about that bespoke interaction, that partnership, that sense of real, true understanding of the brands we work with and their goals and their objectives, and how audio can add to that. We're working with a lot of subscription businesses. We're working with a lot of media brands. We're working with a lot of content brands, because they can really recognise the power of audio as a channel, that attention, that quality of time spent, but can also see that it will deliver much better, more valuable business results.
What does being independent add to the sorts of partnerships that you can deliver?
I think being independent is really important to me because we're not going to be tied to a media network. So we're not going to say, oh, by the way, you need to focus on this show because, we've got a special deal with them. It's about handpicking the best of podcasts from around the world, making sure that we are delivering the best shows and the most appropriate shows for the budget that we have.
So you can cherry pick from basically the entire world of podcasts, depending on what the strategy is and the goals that we've set ourselves.
Absolutely. Yeah, think of us as a bridge into that world, a bridge into those Spotify charts and those Apple charts, to really take those podcasts that you may not have necessarily heard of, you may not have listened to, and build really valuable partnerships with talent that are absolutely wanting to be part of your brand story.
And I suppose the other part of that is that because you also look after and can offer the value of creating that strategy and those KPIs and setting those goals in the first place, you fully understand kind of where we start from in order to be able to deliver where we need to get to. It's not like somebody just coming to you and saying, we need to do this. You've actually helped build that strategy in the first place, so you can understand more than anyone how to deliver on it.
Absolutely. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to data, but I think it's really, really important to start a lot of conversations with just like, how are you going to measure this? How are you going to create something that is of real value to you? And this isn't just chasing a short-term number. It's about taking the broader objectives of your business and then laddering up the numbers that will drive those important bits of data and drive those headlines for your business. Because in the end, I want to make sure that podcasting is a big long-term channel for you rather than a short-term trying out of a particular campaign.
Okay, so to summarise, robots are taking over, make it personal, give it love. Bridge the messy middle. That's what podcasts are really, really good for. And they're also really, really good for attention. And we're not saying the only thing to do is build your own content. I mean, that is going to deliver on that long-term strategy and the relationship with your brand. And you're going to become a part of their daily ritual and their habit. But if you make your own podcast, your audience needs to hear about it in the first place. One of the ways to reach that audience is through placing ads in other people's content. It's one of the many strings to Fresh Air Media's bow. But also we are actually creating a bespoke boutique independent agency where people who might just be dabbling at the start of their podcast journey, and they can say, okay, help me use the audio space to build my brand, prove the case to me, and then we might start considering making our own content.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, to summarise a few things that I would say is like, don't necessarily just go the easy route. Don't just kind of expect the machine to basically be your answer. Always think about what's the creative, what is the messaging that you're talking to people, how are you going to persuade people? And I think that's the most rewarding part of being any kind of marketer or advertiser. Don't just chase a short-term number. And my challenge to you would be, embrace that messy middle. Be the conversation, have that conversation between your brand and your audience, and don't just be a piece of clickbait or a video that you'll just scroll past as your brain goes into free fall. Take advantage of that attention and don't be that active brand in the middle of the conversation. I think the final thing to say as well is that what we're not about is just about spending a bit of money and then hoping for the best. What we are part is a long-term partner for you to deliver across all your owned media and your earned media as well as paid, to make sure that we're making the very most of the audio channel. It's a really special space. You have a lot of visual stuff all crowding around your daily lives, and audio gives that wonderful escape to be really part of a proper conversation.
Well, I, for one, have thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. I've also thoroughly enjoyed watching the mic get ever so slowly lower and lower. You've dealt with that brilliantly. Shall we go and find your I Love Data mug and go and have a cup of tea?
That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this special edition of Fresh Ears, and please follow wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode.
Fresh air.